We are recording. Welcome to Tangents by JXM.
Wow, that was nice.
That was a good one. One take Matt, they call me.
One take's all you get, then I'm going home.
One is all you need, and I'm going home. I'll send you the invoice. So yeah, a place that we could start, I think. I want to hear your thoughts on, because the idea originated with you, and we're releasing some written content around this, is sunk costs in marketing. And why is it that brands and organizations that are investing in the wrong thing, why can't they get their head out of the sand and stop, call it a sunk cost, and move along?
Well, fear of failure. I think ultimately admission of failure is still seen, no matter how much you want to scroll through social media and things like LinkedIn, and people want to talk about, oh, it's okay to fail. It's okay to fail in the abstract, right? Abstract failure is totally fine, and everyone will talk about how it's good and you learn and you grow. But if you sit down with a group of people and go, hey guys, we failed, and by the way, that failure cost $250,000. Guess what? Failure is no longer an abstract concept for which you can say, oh, I learned and I'll do better next time. Failure now costs $250,000. And was it worth it? What you learned valuable enough? What's going to happen now that you lost it? So I think that's the fundamental reason why sunk costs aren't realized for what they are. In other words, you've spent this money. Nothing you can do is going to make that money magically return. Does it make sense to throw good money after bad to try and produce a return by, further inflating that idea or whatever route you want to go down? Or do you just say, yeah, this is done, this didn't work, and we're going to move along? So, it's not simply about saying to yourself, oh, all right, yeah, I learned. There are real impacts from admitting to sunk costs, and I think people just aren't willing to admit to those unless they're in a situation where they can also wash themselves of that financial. I mean, you and I, right? We can decide to do anything we want as an organization. And if one of us goes out and dumps $100,000 on an idea and it completely fails, I mean, yeah, the different partners, we can hold ourselves accountable, but we also can just wash ourselves of that sin. And we have for more than a decade of, many ideas that haven't panned out, but the cost is never been one that any of us have ever worried about, and that's very, very different in a larger organization.
Yeah, I always look at it like, if I were to do something like that, there's this card to play that is just, yeah, I'm nuts. Like I'm crazy, and I tried this. But you're right, we do have, as founders at JXM, we do have the ability to kind of instantly absolve ourselves of we did that wasn't an abstract but real cost to the organization.
Yeah, it was an actual real thing.
Right. When you come across that, and I'm excited for this part, when you come across that in a prospect or a client situation, I know there are a couple of different modes that we take. If we really strongly disagree with a direction that we think will lead to that problem, we say so. But there's also times to sort of disagree and then still help our customer get the work done or do it, even if we're not on board for where it's headed.
Yeah, I think we must dissent when it's at a certain level. And we say, look, this is why we think this should not begin or should not continue or should not go this way. And it's our job to bring that up. It's also our job that when a client says, okay, I hear and understand that, I want to do it anyway. Well, now the mode changes. Our job is to now help them do what this thing they are asking of us and do it as well as we possibly can. And that's one that I had a hard time with for a while. Won't name names or locations or anything, but I remember
know where this is going.
Yeah. I remember one time when the CEO at a larger organization wanted to do a sponsorship opportunity. And I'm generally very against sponsorships from a pure return standpoint. If there are other things in the mix, supporting the community, supporting a group because you want to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that is completely fine. Those are, hard to mathematically define. To me, they're more feeling based, they're more culture based, they're more brand based, and I don't always get involved in that area of thinking when we're talking with a client. So I will look at it and I'll do the math, and I'll say, okay, we're going to have this specific space. It holds 40,000 people per event. There are X amount of events. There are X amount of eyeballs. Here's our CPM. Okay, how does this math work? And I failed a lot early in my career when I came up against those things because I didn't know what to do with that. When I would present the mathematical aspect of why this shouldn't be done, I was completely missing out on those softer areas. The cultural support, the fact that maybe they just want to do this and that overrides the math. And now, while again, I would probably not make that decision myself, I am in a much better place of both understanding and respecting that individual's right to make that sort of choice. And when I look back at my own decision making over the past decade, I can actually see a little bit of that. For example, how long did it take me to finally admit, and I'm not even sure that I've completely admitted it yet, but I'm pretty sure that I have, that cold calling for us is dead. We're never going to have salespeople. We're not going to do this outreach, crap. We're not going to do any of that. And that is just a dumb, dead idea for us. It doesn't fit our business model at all. And every year or two, I'd come back to it. And not because it had a glimmer of working. I would come back to it because somehow I hadn't been defeated by it yet. I had simply given up. And giving up is really hard for me. So the idea of like sunk costs, I can look at a sunk cost and go, oh, I've been defeated. I can accept defeat and go, I did the best that I could. I put forth the effort and I lost. That's fine. But anytime something feels like giving up in the middle of the fight or capitulation, I have a really strong emotional reaction to that. And subsequently, in discovering that, I've realized that even when you're looking at the math and you're looking at the numbers, there are emotional components that will override all of that. I never saw it in myself in the past. Now I do, which of course made it much easier to kind of see that component within other individuals. So I think that's another aspect of the challenge with sunk costs, is that there's a cost beyond the cost. There's an emotional cost to accepting a sunk cost. And I think that's one that you need to be very aware of, so that when you make the choice to not call it a sunk cost, you know why you're making that choice.
I remember, to go back to the story, so we had this organization that wanted to sponsor this D1 basketball team and wanted their name all over the arena and all that stuff. And you did what you said you did. You laid out a very cold case for why that didn't make sense. You did the math. You look at the eyeballs. You looked at the impressions, and you said just doesn't make sense. You can reach way more people by other means. And I remember the CEO of that organization met with you, and then demanded to meet with me. And I went into her office and she said, "So I just had a discussion with your partner about sponsoring this team." And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "He basically told me that I can't do what I want to do." And there was a long pause, and I said, "What? How do you mean?" And she said, "He told me it was a bad idea and I can't do it." And I said, "Well, I don't know if he would have said you can't do it. He probably said you shouldn't do it." But that's when I picked up on exactly what you're talking about, that it had nothing to do with reach. It had everything to do with emotion, because the next phrase that she threw at me was, "How is it that someone that is not the CEO of this organization is telling me that I can't do something?" And I said, "Well, he's laying out a very logical case for why that money might be better spent elsewhere. But if you feel strongly about it and you understand that you're not going to have the reach, that you're doing this for community goodwill and otherwise, yeah, we'll help you. We'll make it the best we can." And
Which oddly enough, we did. The work that came out of that is funny enough for me. I remember some of the hype videos that came out, and I loved that stuff. I'm like, "Wow, this is awesome!" So you have, on one end you have that cold calculation, and then the end result of it, I'm like, "Oh, this is wicked cool,"
But I think when it comes to the work that we do with our customers, I do think that we do worry about, that real failure. And we take it as a very important calling and a very important responsibility to help guide people.
Well, the failure. I mean, look at one of the larger and more long-term clients of ours. They're in air quotes a small business, but they're investing heavily in advertising, and they give us a lot of trust at this point. I mean, we've been working together for a decade, I think, next year. And we're at the point where here's the budget for the year, go do a good job. We're spending X amount of our dollars from a revenue standpoint on our new business efforts. And we don't go through a media approval process. We don't go through a Crave approval process. I mean, we put up an entirely new website for them, and the owner of the business was riding on an electric bicycle when you called him to let him know that it was ready, and his only question was, "Matt, are you happy with it?" And you said, "Yeah," and he said, "All right, well, put it up." And that now it took it takes a long time to earn that level of trust, and the idea that we could do something to invest, and I still do this day where I'll go and talk and I'll say, "Hey, I got this idea I want to try. It might not work, and it might be like 0.06% of their yearly spend." And he'll look at me like, "Yeah, just do it." And but I still have that feeling where, like, if I'm not risking a budget. I'm risking money in someone's pocket, especially when you're dealing with the principals in a business. Every dollar we spend is a dollar they don't keep, in the sense of if it doesn't come back as a return. If we're doing our job, which in this case we have been for, almost a decade, every dollar we spend comes dressed up as, more. And that's a win, but there's always that aspect of things where, we did this thing and it completely failed. and that's money that could have otherwise been spent elsewhere. So that idea of sunk cost is even more real when, and not saying that when you're working with a large organization and it's a budget, failure doesn't have a real human cost to it in performance, et cetera. It does, but it's made even more real when it's, you're working with an LLC or a closely held S corp. That's, I think it's a little bit different.
So I have the privilege a lot of times of perhaps overseeing something that we thought was a good idea and it not going the way we thought it would. And the privilege part of that is that I usually am not the one that has to go to the client and tell them that it was a huge mess and it doesn't work. So, one of the things that I think you're hyper aware of when that does happen, and it doesn't happen often with us, when it's usually when we say we're going to take a big risk and we're going to try something new and it may not work. And sometimes it does way better than we thought it would, and other times it doesn't. But when you're going back and saying, we're finding it's not going to work, one of the things that I think you do that sets us apart from other agencies is you're not doing a lot of accounting for what it cost us to make that, what it costs the client to make that. You're looking directly at the relationship and saying, we made this mistake and we're going to make it right.
Well, yeah, and a great way to look at that one is on the creative end. You don't really get involved, not because because you probably don't want to, and we all stay within our lane. You don't really get involved in the financial aspects of the business, right? And one of the, you know how we work, but we have a project that we do for a client from a creative standpoint, and there's a set cost for that to them. If we fail in delivering that and having a client that is pleased with our work, we are going to do it until it is good. That means that we will continually bear the cost of rework, right? And now that does fall partially on us to make sure that we work with the kind of clients that aren't going to take advantage of that kind of situation, right? Because there is a point where rework is no longer, it isn't because of us, right? And even when we do have situations where rework is because of something that happened at the client, if we look at it and go, it was outside of their control, we're not going to make them suffer or make them pay because of that. We're going to do what we need to do to help them in their situation and make it right. So, we're never going into a situation where there is rework or having to rethink how we're going to approach a project. Or even, we had a project this year that was experimental for us. And after about 4 months of messing around with it, remember you called me and said, yeah, this is not going to work, and yeah, we probably burned about $7,000 overall internal time on figuring this thing out, getting it done, everything else. And we just said, yeah, not going to work. Client's never going to get billed for that because it was our idea to try. It's not like they came to us and said, hey, can you do this execution this way? We attacked it from a certain point of view. So it's never, in my view, right to make a client pay for a mistake or challenge that was outside of their control. And honestly, many times it's not right to make them pay for a mistake or challenge that was inside of their control because maybe they just didn't see it coming. And we're about partnerships, not about one-offs. We don't really do project work from the standpoint of ongoing. Most of the time when someone initially works with us, it's, oh, okay, there's more beyond what we're looking at. And those kind of relationships allow us to give our clients the comfort of knowing that, yeah, if there is rework or things have to be redone or adjusted, you're not going to get billed every single time that happens.
Yeah, so the emphasis is on the relationship and the growth. And it's the same way on the creative side. You know, when we do have that rare miss, it's usually rooted in some type of twist in communication that happened. And I'm seeking clarification. You know, how did we miss the mark for you? And what can I do to hit the mark or make it right? The instance where we go, yeah, it's just not there and we're not doing it, those are always experimental. And the internal cost of the experiment is usually well worth it because we've learned some kind of lesson. And I think that's another thing that you and I really take into consideration when we think about these things is that we're assuming the risk here, not the client. And we're also getting all the benefit from taking that risk, which is learning from it and fixing maybe what caused the failure at that point. And so for us, it's incredibly valuable. And there are plenty of other organizations that would send an invoice for that time.
Yeah, and I mean, from a learning aspect, you know, how much could we go out and spend on events and coaches and all these other things that exist? I'd rather take that money and invest it in an insane idea for a client that just might work. And then if it doesn't, we've learned probably far more than dropping $10,000 to send a few people to some sort of exhibition to sit through 3 days of relatively boring classes where you learn most of what you've already known and maybe pull one or two gems out of it. Whereas if we take that money ourselves and we invest it on internal ideation, we learn so much more from that. We gain so much more value. And on top of that, that client can now really feel an immediate impact from that thinking.
So in summary, I guess one way to look at it is that we are, you know, we're steering our clients away from sunk costs when we can. We're helping them through that. But we can also end up as a cost that's in some ways sinking. And we're mindful of that because we're relationship focused and not just, you know, like we don't bill by the hour. We don't have a retainer set up. We don't do any of that stuff.
Yeah, and I think ultimately that sort of investment, and you know whether something's a sunk cost or not, you look at that sunk cost investment. You come back and you say we learned something, and it's kind of interesting that it's called sunk costs because one of the things that can sink is a ship, and one of those things that is on a ship might be gold. So maybe one day you sail around back to that sunk cost and you find some treasure.